Hello, my name is Tim Harrison, and I'm presenting this presentation for Lisa Capio's G141 Introduction to Communication course. This presentation will review communication elements in the movie 13 Hours, The Secret Soldiers of Benghazi. We will be covering various communication elements throughout this presentation, some of which will revolve around the life cycle of a relationship. Two of the main characters in this movie are Jack Silva and a gentleman that goes by the nickname Roan. They're friends who are reunited as Annex security for a covert CIA Black Ops base in Libya. They're basically to spy on the Libyan people after the dictator is murdered. Performing these duties ends up taking the life of two men, including Roan. They're separated from their families so they can provide financial support, but they're only to be reunited through tragedy and death. Power and conflict element includes the Annex team. They basically go right from Annex security to all-out war. They're a Black Ops site, so technically they're not even there. There's deniability by the U.S. government because that's how they keep their secrecy. But they end up fighting hundreds of Libyan rebels just to try to save some other Americans' lives. Some of the various forms of communication we're going to go through include like eye contact and hand signals. The setting in the movie is Benghazi, Libya, and as stated, an American diplomatic compound with the U.S. Ambassador Chris Stevens is overrun, and Stevens and another American are killed. Stevens is there, to try to promote goodwill with the Libyan people, and after the loss of their dictator. Stationed less than a mile away are members of the Annex security team, who are former soldiers hired to protect the covert CIA operatives in Benghazi. These are former Navy SEALs, Air Rangers, and Marines. As the assault rages on, the 6 men engage the combatants in a fierce firefight to save the remaining Americans' lives. The main characters in the movie include Jack Silva, Tyrone, Roan Woods, Chris Tanto Paranto, Dave Boone Benton, John Tig Teagan, and Mark Osgeist. One of the things in communication, besides what you think is verbal, is also listening. The Annex team has just gotten to the diplomatic compound trying to rescue the ambassador, and when they get there, they come in and they're seeing all these Libyans running around. Now they know the compound is supposed to be protected by a group called February 17th Martyr Brigade, which is a group of armed Libyan citizens hired to be basically security. The level of listening that was comprehensive due to the critical life and death situation the team was encountering. So basically they're storming in to try to save the ambassador, and they don't know who is friend and who is foe. Some of the external barriers, of course, interrupting, a combat zone with gunfire and explosions, and trying to save lives. There's not really a lot of verbal communication there because it's life and death, and you got to keep all your focus on the battle at hand. And then it also becomes emotional once they realize that they have not found the ambassador, and one of the people last seen with the ambassador was found dead. Overcoming these barriers are impossible, however. It could have been easier if they could identify friend from foe. One person I focused on was Chris Tanto Paranto, by telling him to stay focused on the message and not to become too distracted. He has quite a bit of sarcasm, but I think he uses that as a coping mechanism during these tense situations. Another aspect of communication is culture. So, the American culture, the main characters form American Special Forces. Their culture is directly related to the conflict in the movie. They are security for a covert operations base in Libya. When the situation gets combative, they are conflicted as to who are the aggressors and who are friendly. Three types of the elements of culture in this movie include high context culture, Arab culture based on beliefs, they just lost a tyrant as a dictator, and they want to run their own country, and they think that, Ambassador Stevens and the U.S. government is trying to inflict their will, by coming over after this government's overrun. And then, on the other part, you got the low context culture of the American. We know the compound's under siege. We know there's life at stake, but yet, we can't go and help because, we have to have orders to do so. And then finally, individualistic culture. Americans through, even though they fought as a group, they're specially trained and they can function on an individual basis. Some verbal messages. In this scene, it's between Jack Ronan and the CIA chief. Ronan's just picked up Jack at the airport, and on their way, they're stopped at this checkpoint, which is basically, a group of militants, who are strong-arming, citizens and outsiders, to see what they're doing. So the leader comes up, and Ronan and Jack have guns in their faces, and, Ronan bluffs his way out by saying, look up in the sky. Do you see that drone? No, because it sees you. Basically he uses that to help bluff his way out through the checkpoint by telling the leader that, hey, you do something to us, this drone knows who you are, knows who your family are, we'll come back and take care of it. Jack is like, relieved, saying, hey, wow, we have air support. And Ronan said, no, we have no effing support. Getting back to the base, Ronan engages the CIA chief, saying, hey, chief, if you want to avoid an international incident and we're not supposed to be here, give me my guys when I ask for them. And the station chief just says, hey, look, you guys bunk here, you're not CIA, you're hired help, act the part. Nonverbal characters for this scene are the entire Annex team and its Somali arms dealers, and then also when Ambassador Stevens meets the Libyans. So the Annex team is sent out by the CIA to buy illegal arms that Somalians have gotten, from hijacking Russian ships, or, all kinds of ships, actually. So Ronan's waving a red flag to show the location. There is a language barrier here as well. So, when the lead Somali gets out, of the truck, he starts showing authority by waving his pistol around. And he's in a personal space of 1.5 to 4 feet, so this is like an aggression. So they keep debating on whether or not to take this individual out because they don't know what he's going to do. When all of a sudden Tonto shows, the Somali leader a hang loose sign, basically extending out his pinky and thumb, which is, the Hawaiian thing of, hey, just chill out. And surprisingly, when the Somali leader does it back, it diffuses the situation. That leads us to where, Ambassador Stevens going to meet some Libyan leaders. It looks like a mayor-type leader. And it's supposed to be a confidential meeting. But all of a sudden, a bunch of reporters show up, and you see things like, the Libyan citizens are smiling and shaking his hand, the leader comes up and shaking his hand. And then, just to show the other part of it, a waitress drops a tray of glasses and breaks them. In the United States, that would, make somebody laugh or whatever. But it just shows you the terrified look in the people and of the Annex team that, this is a very tense situation, and maybe those broken glasses were a distraction for something bigger. Verbal versus nonverbal. September 11th is the day of the siege, but we all know, that's a sad part in American history. But you see, nonverbal, hundreds of Libyans praying. You see a U.S. flag at half-mast. You see Libyans gathering around the compound. Unknown people taking pictures of the compound at a roof nearby. And then you see another one of Jack's facial expressions when Robe asked if there's anything new back home. And then when the compound siege starts, you see the security team running from the compound. Verbal. Ambassador Stevens, they do a verbal thing of him writing in his journal with security concerns. And, basically saying that, who are these people taking pictures this couple days in a row? Why is this happening? And, trying to find out who left the back gate open and the lack of security around the compound. And you also see Jack's wife telling him he is pregnant and the shocked look on his face. So nonverbal was very effective and brought to the forefront the seriousness of the situation that was about to take place and how unprepared we were, especially when the ambassador is the one that sees the guys taking the pictures instead of his security team. Interpersonal relationship, the closeness and openness. Jack is on video chat with his wife, and she's kind of going through McDonald's back home with the kids. Jack's joking around with his daughters about, hey, mommy's taking you to Disneyland, did you thank her? And then, she starts talking about, hey, I got, a second notice on your life insurance policy. He's saying, hey, honey, you got to pay it, basically saying I'm in a bad situation, or if I die, this is going to help protect the family financially. And then they're talking about, taking down a tree in the front yard, and she thinks the guy's ripping her off because it's a woman, and he jokes around saying, well, maybe I'll take the tree down when I get back, and she says, well, yeah, we'll definitely need the life insurance policy at that point, when suddenly one of his daughters yells out, Daddy, we're having a baby. Jack's in shock, his wife starts crying, and, because they're strapped for money, that's why he's in Libya. And it breaks away with Jack's wife telling the order taker at McDonald's, she's crying and saying, hey, look, I got 600 kids, just give me anything, it doesn't matter. Tension at the NX team, the CIA chief is on the phone with the compound, and he hears that they're getting attacked. And Rona's telling the chief, hey, I hear AK-47s and RPGs. His men run up to him, all strapped up and geared to go, saying, hey, and he tells them, hey, you don't have to go, but we're their only hope. And the CIA chief says, hey, you're not the first responders. You will stand down. Rona and the chief's relationship has become disillusioned due to the tension of the embassy. Rona's focus is on protecting the life, while the ambassador's main focus is attaining anonymity. Even though the movie's focus is on communication, being the main part being tension and battle scenes, there's plenty of other examples of interpersonal communication. The way the men go back home, they communicate with their wives by video chat, the love they feel, and the conflicted emotions of not being home, but they need to be there to financially support their families. The brotherhood they feel for each other, knowing that every day is a potential life and death situation. In those situations, it's ultimate responsibility and a high level of trust. And then the interpersonal conflict they have, knowing that they needed to be at an ambassador's compound, getting there sooner could have saved his life, but because they had to wait for orders, it ultimately cost the ambassador his life. The fact that they were a covert operation, technically they weren't there, so getting assistance was not going to happen. Most of the movie is centered around tension, but not only tension between the United States and Libya, but also beginning of the movie when Rova's driving through and it stopped at that checkpoint that we brought up earlier. We see cultural elements of the beliefs of the Libyan revolutionaries that after their dictator falls, they feel the need to remove the ambassador, as he's just there as another America trying to force our culture into their country. And the other end, we're seeing bookends of the U.S. where, even though we know there's a life and death battle down the road, we need permission to go. The nonverbal conflict of trying to distinguish ally from foe when storming the ambassador's compound, not knowing who's friend and who's the hired help, or if they're rebels trying to attack the base. And in my opinion, the largest verbal conflict is the U.S. government, between trying to keep, deniability about the covert base to a total lack of military support. Basically we need to protect that anonymity more than we needed to protect U.S. citizens. So in summary, I learned much during this assignment about many components of communication, from the ones we use every day like verbal and nonverbal, and especially verbal communication, if it's emotionally conveyed, how that emotion can affect the interpretation of that communication. Also the different types of interpersonal communications, including various stages of relationships. At 13 hours, the main stage was intimacy and deterioration. Ambassador Steve was there to assist the Libyan people during their time of crisis, only to be murdered in a battle between Libyan rebels and Americans being killed. The loss of their leader, Roan, to a mortar attack, and the ultimate price that cost Roan's family by losing a loving husband and her father. He was there for financial support, but also for the brotherhood he felt by those he fought alongside. And here are the references. Thank you very much.